Welcome to this episode of The Self-Led Leader. In today's episode, we are kicking off The Psychology of series, where every week I'll be diving into a topic and explaining the psychology behind it so that you understand what is happening and why. In this kickoff series, we are starting with the psychology of why you don't feel like an authority at work, whether that's in your career, in your team meetings, or in the way that you show up with clients. Today, we are unpacking exactly why that is happening and what you can start to do to change it. Because odds are you've already tried the tips and the tricks and read the books, and still it hasn't shifted. So after today, my goal is to help you understand the why so that the what comes naturally as well. Let's get right into it. This is The Self-Led Leader. I'm Dr. Christina Ady, and in this show, we explore how your beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of determine the results that you're getting. Every week, we go beyond your skills and strategy to explore the psychology of how you operate and how it's been limiting you so you can finally achieve the goals you didn't think you could. Let's get into today's episode. If you've ever received the feedback that you need to come across as more of an authority, whether that's in your executive presence or in your communication skills, that may have left you wondering how to do it. Or more likely, it left you assuming that you have to show up in a more extroverted, fake confidence, bold kind of way. You see, there's an outdated misconception that I keep coming across with really smart, capable, modern leaders who think that the only way to come across as an authority is to abide by outdated stereotypes of someone who is, bold, extroverted, physically large, taking up space, talking to everyone or talking over everyone. And if you're an individual who doesn't resonate with that, if you don't see yourself as the type of person to do that, then coming across as an authority can feel darn near impossible. And it might even feel like something that you actively don't want to do. So today I'm going to understand you the psychology behind why that's happening and how we can start to shift things for you. So the first thing that I want you to understand is when it comes to understanding authority, we first have to unpack what your personal definition of an authority is. Because odds are, based on the life experiences that you have had, especially based on the experiences and definitions you have been told to have, most notably by your parents, your family system, and the teachers that you have had, these experiences have shaped your definition of what an authority is and what your relationship with authority is specifically. So some of us have had parents who are more authoritative, who enforce their authority upon us and have taught us that we must listen to and abide by the rules of the authority figures in our lives. So when it comes to work, that understanding translates and carries itself over, and you might actually feel way more anxious or stressed or nervous around speaking to authority, showing up in front of authority, or even making recommendations, making suggestions for fear of being wrong or them not liking the information or the ideas or the suggestions that you're presenting. And it doesn't matter if it's in a team meeting or with a client. The same underlying fear can drive you to then exhibit behaviors like feeling like you lack communication skills, rambling or talking in circles, getting the jitters or nerves that visibly present themselves either through shakes or through the way that you suddenly can't articulate your thoughts. All of these behaviors that we often misattribute to things like lacking executive presence or lacking communication skills or not sounding like an authority actually stem from psychological fears that we have based on the explanations or the definitions that we have for something like what an authority figure is. So before you can even begin to work on showing up as an authority for yourself, you first have to very clearly define what being an authority means to you. Because once you can define what being an authority is, once you can define what that persona entails, you can then very clearly list the qualities that you think go into being an authority. And this is where things get interesting. Take a moment right now and contemplate, what does being an authority or what does an authority figure mean for you? Is it someone who sets the rules? Is it someone who makes decisions? Is it someone who's responsible for everyone else? How do you define it? What adjectives would you use? What values would you give them? What definition would you use? Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because once you have that definition of who an authority is and what that entails, then you can go on the opposite side and define yourself. How do you currently see yourself? What adjectives and nouns and words would you use to describe yourself? Do you see yourself as having any of the same qualities as an authority currently? Or do you feel like you are on the opposite end of the spectrum or on a completely different spectrum of your own? This is where it gets very, very personal, and it's important to understand your psychology and your personal operating system, how you view the world, how you define these things, because they are influencing your behavior and the way that you're showing up at work, in team calls with clients. And so when you're going on YouTube or reading these books that have taken this broad information, especially if you're reading anything with research, it kind of condenses it to the average. And if you're not, if you're sort of going after generic tips and tricks, you run the risk of consuming information that isn't tailored or personalized to you. And so if you are reading generic advice online, especially if it's anything that seems so incredibly repetitive that you've already heard across multiple different sources, it's not resonating with you because it's not hitting on your psychology. And so when you understand how you define an authority and how you define yourself, you then get to see the mismatch between the two. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because if you fundamentally don't view yourself as having the qualities of someone who is an authority, can you then see why it feels like you are faking it, like you're performing, or like you're just not a good fit for being an authority? Because fundamentally, with your psychology, with your definition, with your upbringing, the two don't match. And that's extremely important to understand, because yes, you can go out and consume all the communication courses or presence courses or, leadership style courses. But until you fundamentally change how you are seeing yourself, how you are defining yourself, until you expand and broaden your point of view to be able to encompass some of those authority qualities, the work just won't last. You might be able to stand with the steeple pose and fix your posture temporarily and use a structured format, but it just won't come across as an authority. That's why you hear so much about, I did the thing and it didn't work. I tried this formula, but I'm still rambling, right? I took this course, but I'm not seeing the results that I want. And that's because you're missing the underlying psychology underneath your behavior. And so part of the work then becomes understanding the mismatch, the gap, where you need to bridge the two definitions. The next layer becomes redefining what it means to be an authority for you. Because if you understand where that definition came from, you can then start to dissect it and pick apart the pieces to see if they're actually relevant. Or, which is often the case, is your definition of being an authority an outdated definition that no longer resonates with current societal trends, with the workforce and the culture of the workforce that you're in, and more importantly, with the type of authority that you personally would like to be? Because it's one thing to understand what an outdated, stereotypical authority looked like 20 years ago, but it's another thing to look at the nature and the state of your current workplace and contemplate and consider the type of leader that you would like to be and the type of authority that you would like to be. Now, the caveat to this is that it can't be too far gone from the norm. It does still need to have elements of what a typical authority means. Because especially if you've received feedback on this, because if people are expecting you to be able to lead, to make decisions, if your supervisor or your director or your clients are expecting you to be able to lead them and to make decisions and to take ownership of your work, there's some room for flexibility in how you do that. But you won't be able to be super passive or super quiet or not ask any open-ended questions and make indirect decisions and be considered as an authority, right? So you have some flexibility and some room to play with your new updated definition. But you still have to understand that there will always be a source of tension between how you show up and how others expect you to show up if there's a massive difference between the two. And prime example is the situation you're in now if you've been told to be an authority, right? And so the work becomes about understanding your definition of an authority, understanding your personal definition of yourself, seeing the mismatch that has occurred, understanding where you can bridge the two, and then updating your definition of yourself as well as the behaviors that follow. Because again, you can layer on all the tips and hacks and things you learn online, but if they don't actually resonate with how you see yourself, they just won't work. They won't work the way that you intend them to, and they won't work for a prolonged period of time. That's why you can try something and after 2-3 days feel like you've completely fallen off the bandwagon and not understand why. And so I like to think of your psychology as the foundation of your perspective in the world, the foundation of your behavior. You see, how you view yourself, how you define yourself, how you think about yourself, it completely shapes what you think you're capable of, what you're willing to do, and all of the things that you're not willing to even try. And so when it comes to something like being an authority, if you don't feel like you are able to lead others, to make decisions, to let other people know that their idea won't be the idea that's being followed through on, or to let them know that there's some gaps in the way that they're doing things, that can be very intimidating. And so until you develop the self-trust in yourself to trust your own judgment, to trust your own perspective, to trust your own expertise, and then have the self-trust to actually follow through and share it with other people and stick by it, until you have that fundamental understanding of yourself with yourself, of course, it feels incredibly difficult and near impossible to speak with confidence and share your idea using a 3-point structure that you learned online. Is this starting to resonate for you? Your psychology is so incredibly important. It is the greatest performance driver that you will ever have. It's the greatest investment into yourself that you can have, understanding how it is that you currently operate and why. And so when it comes to the psychology of sounding like an authority, hold off on learning more tips and tricks. Hold off on working on your communication and start by doing the psychological inner work of really and truly understanding how you see yourself, how you currently show up, and how you think you are not allowed to show up. Because they are opposite sides of the same coin that are equally important to understand. Because whatever you're allowed to do, you're willing to try. But what you think you're not allowed to do, those are the things that are intimidating, terrifying, nerve-wracking, the things that will keep you up at night for weeks at a time. And I don't want you to stay in that position. And so this has been the psychology of why sounding like an authority is so incredibly hard. I'll see you next week.